Hello, and welcome to episode 6 of Super Deep Movie Analysis. I'm Lec Zorn. I'm joined by guest co-host Michelle Gussow, and in this episode we continue our preview of the upcoming Rocky sequel, Creed, by reviewing the 1982 classic Rocky 3. Well, anyway, so Rocky...
We need to get you more in the camera.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
So, anyway, in Rocky 3, we open up, unlike Rocky 2, which opens at the end of the predecessor, Rocky 3 opens about, well, it takes us to a collage that goes up about 4 or 5 years. We know that Rocky 2, even though it was released in 1979, that supposedly happened, it supposedly ended on Thanksgiving night, 1976, and so then we go ahead over about 4 or 5 years where we see that Rocky rolls over the competition. He wins 10 consecutive fights, and then meanwhile there's another contender moving up the ranks, who looks a lot more intimidating than Apollo Creed did, and meanwhile Rocky's also changing his lifestyle. Now he's presumably making millions a fight. He lives in a mansion. He and Adrian and their son Rocky Jr. are living the high life. He's on the Muppet Show. He's making an American Express commercial. He's on the cover of just about every magazine in America. And then you see Clubber Lang. He apparently has this unhealthy obsession because it seems like he's in the audience with a very good seat at all of Rocky's fights.
Well, actually, a lot of times.
He could have been on the undercard.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it. Though a lot of times they will have another fighter ringside, they are able to get good seats to other fights. I think we've seen that.
Yeah, and then apparently, Mickey has some kind of interest in Clubber, since we see him in the crowd in at least one of Rocky's matches. And what's interesting about that opening collage, set of course to the Survivor classic Eye of the Tiger, is that in one thing you see in the collage is Adrian seems to be loving it. She spends much of the series trying to get Rocky to retire, but during that collage, she seems to be just loving it. Loving the lifestyle and just watching her husband, cheering her husband on as he rolls over those easy opponents.
Well, and I think that's some of it too, because she's not really seeing him take the pounding that would scare her into wanting him to stop, perhaps.
And, that song, Eye of the Tiger, of course by 1982 it was common for pop music to be used in films. I mean, it had been for several years. But I think to this day, it's been 33 years later, and it's hard for me to think of a better use of pop music in a movie like that, because I think that song, Eye of the Tiger, and as we'll get into later, it was written specifically for that scene, and of course it was used also around the middle of the movie and then in the closing credits as well. But it was written specifically for that scene, and it just fits it, fits it perfectly. The guys, in Survivor, Jim Peterick and Frankie Sullivan, who wrote the song, said the guitar attack was meant to go along with all the boxing that was seen during that collage, and then of course the phrase "Eye of the Tiger" was used repeatedly in the film, and the whole lyrics are about losing your edge. So many times it happens too fast. You trade your passion for glory. Don't you lose your grip on the dreams of the past. You must fight just to keep them alive. And it's rare that you have the lyrics of a song just really capture the feel of the movie. And sum up the message of a movie in just a few words like that.
Oh yeah, and I think that again, we've talked about the music in general helping to move things along.
Yeah.
And I think obviously it did that too with the first scene and later too in the training.
Yeah, and in fact, just last night I watched Rocky 5 in preparation for that episode, and to me it struck me even more so having watched the previous 4 in close proximity, and now getting ready to watch the 6th one again. I think the music, while it's certainly not bad, I think the music overall was, I think from a musical standpoint, Rocky 5 is the weakest film, where there's the least musically interesting that really enhanced the film.
Right.
As he was
Yeah.
going for the rap audience, and that being said, sometimes rap music can be used very well too. Like I thought, as we'll get to in the Rocky Balboa analysis, I thought the 3-6 Mafia song was used very powerfully with Dixon's entrance to the ring, in that movie. So I'm not saying that rap music cannot be used well in film, 'cause I think it can too, even though it's not my favorite
Right.
genre.
Exactly.
But so anyway, we get to the end of the collage, and we see that Rocky's on top of the world, and that with Clubber Lang, we don't even know that's his name yet, but we see that he's someone who wants the heavyweight championship in the worst way, and he trains relentlessly, and what he does, the way he punishes opponents in the ring, it's like he's visioning it's Rocky,
Well, and what's interesting there too is that he's on his way up, and he's got his mindset or mentality,
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
At the same time, when Rocky's seeing retirement,
Yeah.
so you've got that antithesis.
Oh yeah, and Mr. T, of course, I think it helped because Mr. T, I believe that was his first film role ever. I could be wrong about that. At least it was very close to it. So basically, he was someone who was unknown to audiences before that movie, and I think when you're, and similar to Dolph Lundgren in Rocky Four, I think when you have a bad guy and he's not someone who you've seen before, and you've not someone to have any expectations about, that really makes a difference. And it can be the same way for a good guy. I think that's I don't think, for example, that Rocky would have worked well had he been played by Ryan O'Neal or Burt Reynolds, or
Right, which had been the considerations
Yeah.
as we talked about.
And I'm not saying that those guys couldn't have given a good performance, but I'm saying the audiences would have already had some kind of expectations based on having seen those actors many times before.
Right, and I think that actually helped the series move along in general. That you had somebody that you could follow and kind of come in on the ground floor with the character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that being said, I mean, is there anything else in the opening collage that you think?
I just think what's interesting about that is you see him winning fight after fight, and you don't know yet that those opponents are not really the top people that he could be fighting.
Yeah.
And he's knocking them out, and so in the mindset of the audience, you could actually be thinking, oh, he's getting stronger, or because if you think about the fights that he had with Apollo Creed, where they were close calls, both of them.
Yeah.
And now he's in there and knocking out, but you don't know that they're less than worthy opponents, and so it will put the viewer in a different mindset as to what they're seeing as far as Rocky's skill or what's risen him to his position. So it's just something that occurred to me.
Yeah, although we do see the clues that that he's you see that he's got a motorcycle, he's got a mansion, and we see that he's like on the Muppet Show, and we see that he's doing a lot of things that really demonstrate that he's not focusing all his attention on fighting.
Well, exactly, but I kind of looked at that, in separate mindset. What's happening in the ring, what's happening here, and it's almost like he was preparing himself for that transition when he wasn't going to be fighting anymore.
Yeah, that could be as well.
So it's terrible, I think, to just especially for an athlete of any kind, because you're going to get to that point where physically you just can't do it anymore, no matter.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of them, and so you have to have something else to fall back on a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, if that mindset's there, either maybe Adrian, somebody keeping, you need to have something else that you're doing, just in case.
Oh yeah, and
so,
I always think of an example, a guy named Greg Page, who I always call the second most famous heavyweight champion from Louisville, Kentucky. Of course, Muhammad Ali was from there too. But anyway, Page was one of those guys who briefly held one of the heavyweight belts in that era between Ali and Tyson. He had the belt for like 5 months. He won it, and then he lost in his first defense and never got another title shot. But yeah, he was a guy who he had been trained by his father, who died when Greg was like 16, 17, and the general consensus among people who knew Greg was, after his dad died, he never had the same focus, and conditioning was always a problem for him, and he ended up having a good career that could have been a great career. But anyway, he spent time, in the 90s after he retired working in a factory. And then he tried to make a comeback. He did some club fights, had a brain hemorrhage in the ring, and died a few years later at 50. But yeah, the thing is, a lot of former boxers, they end up doing manual labor because they have no skills other than boxing.
Yeah, and Rocky to me is likable, personable,
Oh,
whatever
yeah.
word you want to use. He's got a good look to him, and so it seemed logical that they get him in commercials.
Oh yeah, yeah, and of course, obviously, having risen, from being a club fighter, to being heavyweight champion, obviously he epitomizes the American dream. So yeah, he would have been very marketable, and so, anyways, but then that doesn't sit well with Paulie, his brother-in-law, who
Oh, yes.
he leaves a bar right after the collage where you see Clubber Lang boasting on TV about how great he is and wanting Balboa in the ring, and everybody in the bar is like saying things like "Give Rocky my best," and then of course Paulie's attitude is "What about me? I've been coming here for all these years," and so he goes into a video arcade, which of course that's very timely since that was when the video arcades were at their peak.
Oh yeah.
And I don't know, was there ever actually a Rocky pinball machine that existed?
I'm going to say that I had seen one, in fact.
Yeah, it was certainly, I wouldn't count it out, especially because when the Rocky movies became famous, it was the tail end of the pinball machine era, right before video games became commonplace.
Right, and I promise I don't remember where, but
Yeah.
I had seen one. I had seen one. Yes.
So Paulie takes this flask and throws it at the pinball machine, gets arrested, and we never found out how the case got resolved. They probably let him off with community service or something. But
you know what I'm guessing about for that?
what?
I would imagine that as long as Rocky made good and paid for the machine, they probably let it go.
Oh yeah,
they probably let it go.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So anyway, but I like the conversation though when Rocky's gotten Paulie out of jail and they're walking to the car and Paulie's just rambling about how he's been disrespected over the years and he's gotten the short end of the stick, that you moved Mickey and what's wrong with me. And then even complaining about his Rolex watch not working, that was of course a gift for him in part 2.
Right.
And then taking it off and then kicking it when Rocky tries to pick it up, and and then that's one time when Rocky's not the type who's bluntly honest very much, but this is one time when he tells Paulie that his problem is that you're just a jealous, lazy bum.
You're good at that. We were talking about that before we started this. He does a great Rocky, doesn't he?
Thank you. But yeah, so then Paulie, he challenges Rocky to a fight, but then I think realizes it's a losing battle, and then just asks Rocky for a job, and Rocky says all you got to do is ask.
Exactly. So, no, I was gonna say that scene actually goes back again to, we were talking, I guess, in one that Rocky doesn't seem to hold grudges.
No, he doesn't.
I mean, here's Paulie being completely obnoxious to him, and all you got to do is ask.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then we see Rocky and Adrian, relaxing in bed together. It's a pretty innocuous scene. I guess just they're trying to show that they're still happily married a few years later, and Rocky's trying to teach Adrian how to sing "Take You Back," which I believe that song is featured in some form in every movie in the series except for 4, because I know there's a rap version of it in 5, and then of course 6 opens with it, and I know it's in 1. I think it's in 2 as well. But anyway, so then we see the first Rocky/Rocky Jr. scene when not counting Rocky Jr.'s infancy.
Right.
So Rocky's teaching his son about Pinocchio, and it's a cute scene. Driving some kind of car, I don't know what you call that. They were driving it around the Balboa estate. He's driving some kind of
Right.
It looks like it's like a wooden toy with a motor, where that
Yeah.
people can fit in. But
This is another one of those things. Somebody watching will know exactly what it is.
yeah,
It's fine. Let us know. You can.
yeah. Now I know when we get to the Rocky IV robot, I do have some information on that, but we'll save that for the next episode. But so yeah, we see that Rocky's a good dad, and it wouldn't be until part 5 that their relationship was deeply explored, which of course we'll talk about that a lot in 2 episodes from now. But
Yeah. And I'll throw a little bit of trivia in there because I
Yeah.
don't remember the actor's name who played Rocky Jr. in this one, but he was in a very short-lived TV series. You can look it up. It was called Two Marriages, and it had C. Thomas Howell. We remember him from The Outsiders.
yeah,
He was Pony Boy.
Yeah, he was one of the kids in E.T. as well. C. Thomas Howell was,
Oh, but yeah.
and then later he was in a movie that I personally disliked, but that has a cult following, called The Hitcher, which it's one of the worst reviews I ever saw Roger Ebert give, by the way. But anyway, I'm looking to see, 'cause I don't remember who played.
Yeah, but I remember him from that show.
It's interesting. You have a. Granted, it was an infant in Rocky 2, but then you have 3, 4, 5, and 6. You have a different.
Actor.
Yeah, and it was Sage Stallone, of course, his son in number 5,
And I do want to talk about that when we get to 5.
oh, we definitely will. Yeah, that was to me, that was probably the best element of 5. Was the exploration of that relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Ian Freed
Oh, okay. Yeah.
is his name, and let's see, he was born December 17th, 1974, in Akron, Ohio. He has 22 credits on IMDb, but none since 1990. And his first was Chips. And he had 1 episode, and then National Lampoon's movie Madness, and then Rocky 3. And then he was on the TV series V. Okay, he was on an episode of Alice, an episode of Silver Spoons, an episode of Different Strokes. He did a lot of big TV shows, I see.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But anyway, so then Rocky decides to, they have this, they dedicate a statue to him, and he decides it's time to announce his retirement.
And in a way, that seems fitting. The statue,
Yeah.
Could signify the end there. To me, one of the things I was thinking about is how, in a way, that statue is symbolic of the celebrity that had happened to him.
Oh yeah.
As opposed to being a fighter, now he's a celebrity, and I think that statue is very symbolic of that.
Yeah, and it was, and of course it's believable that he would be a hometown hero, because I'm from close to the Louisville, Kentucky area, and I know all the stuff they have to commemorate Ali down there. So basically they have an entire museum for him down there. There's a major street that's named after him, stuff like that. Then he announces his retirement, and then for the first time we have a wait before that, I forgot to get into his his match with Thunderlips, which is earlier. I forgot about that. So we see that Rocky has this charity match against Thunderlips,
right.
Played by, of course, Hulk Hogan.
Yes.
And in a scene that I think a lot of people dismiss it as being just silly, and I actually like the scene for this reason. Well, first of all, I think it's an innocuous scene regardless, but even aside from that, I just think it shows where Rocky's mindset was at the time. He was a good person. He liked the idea of doing something for charity, and at the same time, he had gotten so much into the whole celebrity thing and maybe trying to prepare for life after boxing and being a mainstream celebrity, that he was willing to do publicity stunts like this,
Right.
And of course the scene, it was it was very well choreographed. I mean, it's very much like something like that, what you'd expect something like that to be.
Right.
And I do enjoy the interaction between Rocky and Mickey and Paulie, before the match, and then then Hulk Hogan. It's funny to look back in retrospect because he was such the epitome of the pro wrestling good guy for much of the '80s. But to see him, as the bad guy there was funny, and the same thing with Mr. T, that he became a perennial good guy as well.
Right.
After this movie, but yeah, I thought it was just a fun scene. And then there's one thing that you see is when Paulie gets in, and when Thunderlips is being really dirty, and Paulie gets in and intervenes in Rocky's behalf. You see, as you'll see occasionally throughout the series, that even when Paulie was just portrayed as a buffoon, he was loyal to his family.
Yeah.
So, and I also like the conversation where at the beginning where Rocky's like talking to Thunderlips, trying to be really friendly to him, like talk about how they give the audience a good show, and then maybe we can pose for a Polaroid afterward.
Right. Yeah.
And like being really innocent and friendly about it, while Thunderlips is just acting like a vicious animal.
Like he's already in character.
Yeah. And so then they have that, and they have their match, and then they're friendly to each other afterward, and supposedly a lot of pro wrestling rivals in real life are best friends.
And not to drift into another film, but
Yeah.
the movie with Mickey Rourke, the wrestler.
I haven't seen it, but I've heard about it.
Well, one of the things there is you actually see, like, when they're backstage, I'm going to call it backstage, before the match, and they're kind of choreographed what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And you can see that they're friendly. Okay, and they know each other, and they know each other's moves, and they, it's like, we get to this round, you do that thing you do with your knee, or you.
Yeah.
So I see that.
And that was, but it ended up being a very culturally significant scene because at that time, none of the pro wrestling organizations had national audiences. They were all regional. Like, for example, my brother grew up watching one. We watched it on Louisville, Kentucky TV. It basically covered Kentucky and Tennessee, and although a lot of the stars from there ended up going on to the WWF back in its glory days in the '80s, but anyway, so Vince McMahon, who had, that was around the time that he bought the WWF from his father, who was near death at that time, and so he went hard after Hulk Hogan because of the celebrity status he gained from that movie, and then he started syndicating his broadcasts all over the country. And it was the first time any pro wrestling organization had ever done that. It really changed, it revolutionized pro wrestling in the '80s, which, I don't think is a very good thing, even more so in retrospect. And I am so thankful. My kids are 10 and 11. They have no interest in pro wrestling. And from the little I've seen of it in recent years, that's a good thing. When you look at the way it's evolved, that when I look back at the '80s, I think it was pretty innocuous. And now I think it's just very dark, very sadistic and sleazy, and in the '80s it had very much it was very cartoonish, but it was just a typical good guy bad guy thing, So anyway, so Rocky does that, and then he goes and does his retirement thing, and then Clubber Lang comes out of the crowd.
Yeah, there you go.
And
And in a way, from what we were talking about before, Rocky retiring is a big ripoff for him. I mean, this was his, dream match to go against Rocky.
And it's funny.
Rocky can't take that away from him.
Right. And it's funny, that all those years, that Stallone, or excuse me, that Rocky had fought all those contenders, and they all, you'd see them hugging at the end of every match, and now all of a sudden you have this guy who's, basically there's nothing likable about him. You can't even say like Apollo that he's an antagonist. I mean, this guy is a pure villain.
But what's interesting is to go, from seeing that wrestling thing, and you see that, and in a way, Clubber calling Rocky out is a little more reminiscent of what you'd see with wrestlers.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I mean, I've never seen, I've seen athletes have disputes over the years, but nothing of that level,
Right.
And of course, it is over the top, and it's sensationalism, but it's one of those things. Even though Clubber Lang is a comic book or pro wrestling type character, he plays the part to perfection.
Oh yeah.
And it's ironic that I always marvel at with the lines that become the most famous. And that Mr. T's most famous line from that movie is "I pity the fool," because to me he has quite a few better lines, like don't give this man a statue, give him guts. Or a couple of times when Mickey's like, "You're a disgrace to the sport," and then he goes, "Shut up, old man." Showing real respect for his elders,
Right.
And he says that phrase, "Shut up, old man," twice in the scene.
And again, he's doing everything he can to be antagonistic to get
Yeah.
the result he wants.
And then finally,
which is right, because Rocky's like, I want to fight this guy.
Yeah. And Rocky, when this guy, I mean that's enough, right there. But then he, when basically this guy, well, because it's when Rocky says, "I want to fight this guy," it's right after Mickey says, "I don't care what you ranked, you don't get no shot, and I mean it."
Mm-hmm.
And then of course Mr. T, then he's telling the people that he's glad they're witnessing this, and they see what a coward this guy is, and
Right.
that he's fought a bunch of bums. And then that's when Rocky's telling Mickey, "I want to fight this guy." And then but of course Clubber Lang doesn't hear that, so then he decides to make the advance at Adrian,
Right.
saying, "Bring your pretty little self over to my apartment tonight, and I'll show you a real man." And I just always think about the one thing that I never stop getting a kick out of, just imagining what would have happened if Adrian had really gone over to Clubber Lang's apartment.
Oh, no.
Just imagining him trying to love up on her,
Oh, dear.
Especially you think about like how uncomfortable she gets in situations, where
Right.
there's any kind of conflict.
Right.
And so of course that's when Rocky charges and the security intervenes, and so it was corny, but it was done very well. If they had to do that kind of scene, they did it as well as they could have.
Yeah.
And what another funny thing about Clubber Lang is, as much of a villain as he is, he's not a word of profanity in the slightest. I mean, his language is squeaky clean the whole time. So and of course the profanity in general is pretty sparse throughout the series. But it's interesting that this bad guy, because you think in real life, especially these days, you'd expect an antagonistic athlete like that to have a bunch of words beeped out. But
Definitely.
yeah, so but yeah, Mr. T, he couldn't have been better in that role, and of course with the mohawk and the chains and everything. I mean, he looks intimidating. He looks like Apollo Creed looked like a showman, whereas Mr. T looked like a guy you wouldn't want to run into in a dark alley.
Exactly.
Even though supposedly, again, in real life, like a lot of bad guys, he's a real nice guy. I've heard.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
And he certainly seems like it in interviews. But so then they get back to the mansion, and Mickey's packing to leave,
Right.
and he goes, one of my favorite lines: "He'll kill you to death, Rock."
Oh yeah.
And so then obviously the two make up, and Rocky promises Mickey this will be the last fight, but then
And what's interesting is I'd had a note about that in a way it's prophetic.
yeah
Because it is their last fight together.
yes that's right.
And so it was, like I said, it was prophetic.
It was, yeah, and that makes the scene even more, I mean, it's a touching scene anyway, but even more so because, obviously Mickey ends up dying in the movie, but, but the conversation is revealing in that, Mickey gives Rocky a lecture saying he hasn't been hungry since he won the belt, and Rocky counters that he's, had 10 successful title defenses, and then Mickey says that those fighters were handpicked. So then Rocky starts questioning his worth as champion.
Right, and and it's sort of what I addressed in our analysis of Rocky 2, where I said how important it was that when he asked Apollo, "Did you give me your best?" and Apollo said yes.
Yeah.
Because in effect, what happened to Rocky, hearing they were handpicked, and it wasn't somebody that tough to beat. That's what would have happened when he starts losing his confidence, and that's what had happened earlier.
Yeah,
if he thought Apollo didn't give him anywhere near his best.
Yeah, and exactly, and then another thing that went through my mind when I saw Rocky V again last night, and is, and I'd forgotten just how nurturing Rocky was over Tommy Gunn in Rocky V,
Mm-hmm.
and sincerely loved and wanted to help him, and then. It'll be interesting to see the interaction between Rocky and Apollo's son, who Rocky trains in the Creed movie coming up in a few weeks.
Yeah.
And Mickey, and it's probably one of those things, he doesn't like revealing it to Rocky, but he feels like it's necessary because he thinks that, he's risking his health, and that, he could, because as he said, this, guy, is a killer.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll kill you to death. And I've always, even when I was a kid, I got a kick out of that line. He'll kill you to death.
Yeah, and again, it's getting ahead, but like in 2, where at the beginning, his main concern seemed to be Rocky's health.
Yeah.
He sort of changes his mind and lets it happen anyway.
Oh yeah. So then they agree to do the fight, and we don't get a pre-fight press conference. That would have been interesting,
Oh, with Clubber.
Yeah. But then we see Rocky, he's training. They've rented out some big room where you can come in and watch him train every day.
Yeah, it looked more like an amusement park or an arcade.
Yeah.
One of those like indoor amusement parks or
exactly
arcade. It was all lit up and balloons and.
And I like the contrast where you see Rocky doing that, with with his admiring fans, where you see Clubber training hard alone.
Right.
And I also got a kick out of the part where that young blonde girl asks if she can give him a kiss, and he lets her kiss him on the lips, and then you see the shot of Adrian looking disapprovingly, and then you see, and then Mickey's like, "Get out of here!"
Right. Well, and he said, "Yeah, because Clubber isn't gonna."
He's not gonna kill you. He'll kill you. He's not gonna kiss you. He'll kill you.
Yeah. And Rocky tries to kiss him.
Yeah.
But he's just having a time. He's on that exercise bike.
Yeah.
Very laid back. Oh, here we go.
Yep.
Not really training.
Right. Yeah. And just making a show out of it. Like and it's ironic. It's like it goes back to part 1 where Apollo was viewing the fight as a show, and now Rocky's viewing this as a show.
Right. And Mickey says, "Let's get out of here and let's go. Back to the old gym and train for a fight." Whatever he's doing here.
So then the fight arrives, and
again, it's one of those things I have to say. Mickey knows he hasn't trained.
Yeah.
Just so maybe that stress leads to the heart attack. I mean, part of it. You
never know, but it is. Usually in boxing, the two fighters enter the ring. One will go down with his entourage, and then followed by the other. It just so happens conveniently that the two entourages are entering at relatively the same time, so they can have a pre-fight confrontation. And Mr. T, I remember Clubber talked about like I'm the baddest in the world, and the Rock was like, "You ain't so bad to me." And then I like Mr. T's Clubber's comeback. What you say, paper champion? And of course that sparks the shoving match where Mickey has his heart attack.
Right.
And
and like I said, with all that going on, Mickey has to know Rocky's not ready for that fight. So.
Oh yeah, and then I like the conflict where Rocky sees that that Mickey's ill, and then he calls for help immediately, and then you see that he. Then I also like how when Rocky says I'm not really sure what to do, and then Mickey just snaps and says something like, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself. You don't know what to do. You get up there and fight." But anyway, so Rocky gets out there, and they start the fight, and
let's go ahead of that where they introduce Apollo Creed.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Because Apollo is at ringside.
Yeah, he's commentating the fight.
And they bring him in to the ring, and Clubber snubs him for one.
Yeah.
I mean, just and in a way, as far as egos and attitude and show or whatever, Apollo's met his match. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah.
and. So he tells Rocky to
Oh yeah.
knock him out.
Oh, and I see the line is something like, "I don't want no has-been messing around my corner," and then Apollo just stands there giving him that disapproving stare, and then that's another one of Clubber Lang's best lines. "You better get that bad look off your face before I come over there and knock it off." So then then that's when Apollo goes in and says, "Do everybody a favor and drop this chump."
Yeah.
And then, so Rocky starts the fight, and it's obvious he's not prepared, and he's getting pummeled. And of course, he's asking about Mickey, so obviously, his mind is not fully on the fight.
Fully on the fight.
But one thing I had completely forgotten about, when I was rewatching 3, a week or two ago, is I had forgotten that with Mickey in the locker room, that Paulie basically took over as the head manager for the fight. And what strikes me about it is that he really did make a sincere effort, but he was just completely inept in that role.
Right.
I mean, he did try, but he just obviously had no idea how to manage a fighter, especially for the heavyweight championship of the world.
Oh, absolutely.
And so Rocky goes down in the second round, and I think one thing that was one of the most powerful moments, one of the most chilling moments in the series is. And I think throughout the series, when the referee's doing the count, often, the editing is really well done, as we'll get to, describing, other movies, or other fights throughout the series, including this one. But, like when, right when they get to the 10 count, that you see, it switches to Mickey being given oxygen. Mm-hmm. So that's such a powerful, shift right there, where you see that Rocky's losing the belt, and then you see that Mickey's life is in danger.
Right.
So then Rocky loses it, and Clubber he celebrates, and and boasts. He said, "I told you," and. I don't remember all his lines, but I remember he started, like at the end before it cuts back to locker room, you hear him both like, "Ee! Ee!"
Yeah. The animal noises.
Yeah. And, and to me, the last punch he gives in that fight, that was so well filmed, where it's in slow motion, and you just see that, look in his eyes, like a vicious animal, and he gives that ferocious punch, and then Rocky just falls to the ground almost lifeless,
Right.
And I think anybody who saw it had no illusions that he was going to get up.
Right.
So then Rocky goes to the locker room, and Mickey's near death. And one thing that I am not clear about, that I've read, some people have said that they believe Rocky was implying that he won the fight when he was talking to Mickey.
Well, what happened specifically is Mickey asked what happened.
Yeah.
And Rocky just said it was a knockout.
Yeah.
And let Mickey interpret it. I think he didn't want, I think he knew Mickey was dying. I think he didn't want to lie, but he didn't want to tell him that he'd lost.
Right, right.
So he said it was a knockout and let Mickey interpret it. I don't think Rocky was attempting to lie.
Okay.
I think, you could take that however you wanted, and that's how I took it. He just couldn't tell Mickey that and have Mickey we say leave this earth with that being the last thought.
That could be,
That
would make sense. But then and then see, what was Mickey's last word, or was the last thing he said to Rocky right before he died?
Well, I think he was saying "I love you, kid" or something.
Yeah,
it was maybe the first, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the series where I say and people might jump all over me for this, and you've heard me say it. Sylvester Stallone writes very good platonic love scenes.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, no question about it.
And this was like the first of the many that have been in the series.
Yeah, there were, all throughout, and especially in 5. Even there were a few in 4, and I think one thing I appreciate about Stallone in general is that he sees, even though he has gotten consumed with his testosterone image at times, and that's led to him making some poor choices of films to do, he's always been willing to throw sensitivity into his films. Even there are a couple of moments in the Rambo films which are much more violent than the Rocky films. There's very beautiful moments of sensitivity in those as well, especially the way that the second and fourth end. So yeah, that was, it was a very beautiful scene. And then of course that's one thing. I've never heard in real life about somebody saying something and then dying a few seconds later, saying something touching and dying a few seconds later. I don't know if that's just a Hollywood thing or if that actually happens in real life, but
I'm sure it could. I mean,
yeah,
I always say there's so many people in this world and so many different ways things can happen.
Yeah.
I'm not going to come right out and say that can't.
Oh yeah, and yeah. So it definitely. I'm not saying it's not impossible. I just don't know how common it is.
Right.
But yeah, Mickey dies, and then Rocky is he weeps over Mickey's body, and then you see Adrian standing watching from a distance. She's tearful as well, and then we go to Mickey's funeral and find out that he was Jewish. Yeah, and
and for some people who still actually may not realize that what they were reciting there was the actual mourner's Kaddish.
Mm-hmm.
They were helping him with, the rabbi was saying, and Rocky was repeating
Yeah.
it. And that came up in our movie Soldier Song.
Yes.
And we will talk about that at some point.
Yeah, and of course that's one thing that I thought is that one thing at Rocky 3 and Soldier Song. For those who don't know, Soldier Song is Michelle's movie from a few years ago. Both Rocky 3 and Soldier Song depict a Jewish funeral. And another thing is that in both cases the rabbi is played by someone who has no IMDb credits apart from that role, which it's Michelle's father in the case of Soldier Song, and then in Rocky 3 it's listed as Rabbi Fillmore Berger, and they actually listed him as rabbi, I guess to emphasize that he really is a rabbi in real life. And I've never looked him up to see if he actually, if he's still active or anything.
Yeah.
But,
and the other thing actually in common with both of them was that the mourner's Kaddish was being said with fewer people than, if you're very Orthodox, say that you should have. To some people, there's supposed to be a certain number of people in attendance before you can say that.
Yeah.
And so what I remember is somebody commented on that to me as far as Soldier Song, and I said, if it's good enough for Sylvester Stallone, it's good enough for me.
Yeah. And as far as I've looked up, I've never seen any evidence that Burgess Meredith was Jewish, so I don't think it was a reference to him. And we do see, by the way, on his crypt, he was Mickey Goldmill. That's the first time that his last name was mentioned. And that was the first time his last name was mentioned in the series. He'd only been identified as Mickey up to that point. But it's I always thought of Stallone as being Italian, and of course he is. His father, Frank Sr., was a native of Italy, and he immigrated to America, and where his children were born. But Stallone's mother, Jackie, who's still living, is Russian Jewish on her father's side.
Really?
Yes.
See, that's a new fact for me.
Yeah, so maybe
that was a tribute to her.
Yeah, that could have been, yeah. But yeah, it's that, and so that's my best guess as to why he made Mickey Jewish. But anyway, and it's interesting that the image of sliding his coffin into the crypt was actually done several more times in the series. It was in flashbacks. It was shown several more times when Rocky was going through dark, troubling thoughts. In fact, I think that if I remember correctly, I'd have to go back and verify this, but I think flashbacks are shown in 3, 4, and 5 of that moment. Whenever Rocky's just really troubled about something. But anyway, so then another thing that I've said back in the episode where we did the first one, Mickey identified himself then as being 76 years old. Now that was in November of 1975, which means that Mickey would have been born either in 1898 or 99. But on the crypt, it has Mickey's year of birth as being 1905 and his year of death as being 1981. And I think it was April 7th, 05 to August 15th or something, 81. So that would have made him 76 at the time of his death. even though he claimed several years earlier to be 76. So if he were actually 76 at that time in the original Rocky, that would have made him somewhere in his early 80s at the time of his death. So there's just a little continuity error there.
Meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, and only zealots from the series like us,
Right.
recognize things like that. But I'm surprised Stallone did, since he wrote all of them, though.
Right.
But anyway, and for whatever it's worth, in real life, Burgess Meredith was born in 1907. So it was pretty. They had the date on Mickey's crypt was just 2 years earlier. So anyway, let's see. So then Rocky goes from there to. It looks like he's just going to be a depressed drifter at first. He just walks around, and then he goes over to the statue, throws his motorcycle helmet
right
at the statue.
And that's symbolic too, because it's almost like he's angry at that part of him.
Yeah, that's how I interpret it. Yeah.
That part of him that was a celebrity that let this happen or whatever, and that was so it seemed fitting.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a great scene, and then he goes back, and then he just punches a punching bag in anger, and then you hear Apollo say, "That's not the way to do it." And so, what do you think, though? What do you think Apollo's motivation was? Do you really think that he had gained that much respect for Rocky, or was he mad at Clubber Lang for snubbing him in the ring, or what do you think Apollo's motivation was at this point?
Well, the best I can go with is my first impression is I actually didn't think it had anything to do with Clubber. I think that something in Apollo, since Apollo, as we talked about, really wasn't a bad guy. He was just a lot of pomp and hot air and show. I had the impression that he really, since he had fought Rocky and knew what Rocky had been, and he saw what happened, and I think he genuinely wanted to step in, and he probably knew what Rocky was feeling about that, and maybe realized that if he doesn't get pulled out of this, he's just going to keep going down. I mean,
that could be, yeah. That's probably as good a guess as any, and and it could be that maybe Apollo being out of the sport, and one thing that's not clear is whether Apollo retired instantly after losing to Rocky. That's one thing that we're never
right.
Adrian says at the beginning of 4, you haven't boxed in nearly 5 years, but as we know, the time frame is not always clear,
right.
from one movie to the next, or even within a movie, especially in the case of 5. But anyway, so it could be that Apollo just he needed some kind of competition. Maybe he just missed maybe he just missed the sport.
It's probably a lot of things, but if he had just missed the sport, maybe he would have just started training a new fighter.
Yeah.
As you saw it that when they went to the coast, and
there
were a lot of them there. He could have picked one, and so if he just missed the sport, I think he would have done that. I think he did because I just always felt like he ended up having a personal feeling for Rocky. I just because it was obvious even with one, he hadn't intended to, but he ended up respecting him.
Yeah, and then even at the end of 2, like I forgot to mention in the last episode, but even when he lost in 2, he graciously raised Rocky's arm in victory. It was a very brief shot, but it is
right, because there's a point there, and I am not a follower of boxing, but one of the things I do know is we've talked about this. There is great respect a lot of times between opponents.
There is,
And I think that especially if somebody I overheard somebody talking about a boxing match one time, and they were very upset. Believe it or not, they were talking about some fight where they said he gave a guy a really good fight. The least he could have done was hugged him when it was over.
Oh yeah.
There was this, so it's like, to me in boxing, and I think that carried with that. If the guy really did give you a good fight, and I think they gave each other a good fight on that there's an amount of respect.
Oh yeah, there is, yeah. And So that's what makes it especially unlikely that someone like Rocky would have three opponents who would all be basically the personification of evil but
well, they're out there.
oh they are, yeah.
And he was, I think, trying to depict something a little different than just another, because I think he could have fallen into that trap of having somebody else who was just like Apollo.
Oh yeah, and of course
didn't want to do that.
And he definitely raised the intensity not only with Mickey dying but with an opponent who Apollo. He was a showman, he was an entertainer, he was a businessman, whereas Mr. T is just portrayed as a vicious animal.
Right. I mean, just and no respect for the other fighter.
Yeah.
Nothing. Just it's all about him.
And what's interesting, is you really never, more so than any other Rocky opponent, you really never learn anything about Clubber Lang. That's in the introduction. It's listed he's from Chicago. I mean, that's about the deepest thing we ever learn about him.
So I mean, if we could, if you want to speculate just based on that, if he's, I don't mean this as a racial remark, but he's black. He's from Chicago.
Yeah.
You're picturing someone who fought his way out of a
bad
neighborhood.
Yeah.
So that's why he's the way he is.
Yeah, and you never know if he has a family. You never know anything like that. You don't really know what makes him tick, except that he has this incredible drive. And so then Rocky decides that he's going to he announces his comeback, and then I like when they're watching Apollo, Rocky, Paulie, and Adrian are watching that sports interview TV show, and then the interviewer says, Balboa says he wants to make a comeback. Do you accept the challenge? I love his response.
Right.
I reject the challenge because Balboa is no challenge. However, I'll be more than happy to beat on him some more.
Yeah, that was great.
And then when the opponent goes on to say, how do you feel about him being trained by Apollo Creed?
He says, Apollo who?
you talk about that old fool Apollo Creed.
Yeah.
And then Apollo's watching. He's just watching. Says, keep on talking. And that's when Paulie says, don't listen to him, and then Paulie says, no, do listen to him.
Do listen to him.
When this is over, a lot of people are going to owe you an apology, and you're going to owe me a favor. And of course, that favor, is mentioned a few times throughout the film.
What favor?
Yeah.
What favor?
And so then, anyway, the Apollo tells Rocky that that he needs to get the eye of the tiger back. And Apollo's saying that he himself never had it. And that could be maybe the reason that he's gained so much respect for Rocky. Realizing that he never had the eye of the tiger like Rocky had, so then they go out to L.A. and when they arrive there, that's when you really see the beginning of the character who Paulie would be throughout the rest of 3, then through 4 and 5, before returning to form in Part 6, where basically he just became this crude, constantly nagging and complaining buffoon.
Right.
Basically, it starts where they show up at the gym, and he talks about how it's below human standards. That wasn't his exact words, but it was something to that effect. And he was just finding everything to complain about.
Right. And something about he didn't like them, and
yeah.
Rocky said something, maybe they don't like you too much.
Right. And then, of course, they would repeat that scenario in 4 when they arrived at their isolated training facility there in the USSR. And he basically repeats the same kind of lines.
Right.
And then
well, I guess they use him to help express what some people are probably thinking.
Yeah, because he's someone who obviously has no filter over his mouth, and
people watching the movie would be thinking that. So
oh yeah, there are a lot of people who obviously would be uncomfortable. I mean, let's face it, there are people who would be a lot of people, and I don't mean people who hate blacks, but it would just, nevertheless, there are white people who would be, uncomfortable if they were the only white person in the room.
Right.
So, obviously, Paulie has that discomfort. So then they start training, and Rocky's not doing so well at first. And we find out apparently Duke is the owner of the gym where they are.
Now, something I had to back up on too, because I have the note, and we just kind of went over it when they're leaving to go to LA.
Yeah.
one of the things that struck me is, okay, Adrian and Rocky are leaving the kid again. They're leaving him with the maid.
Yeah, yeah.
And that seems to be something that's repeated.
Yes, yes.
So, that's just something to consider, if you're the kid, and, and maybe that's some of what comes up later in what you call 6.
Yes, yes.
So
And
here they've left the kid again.
Yeah, and that really, and the evolution of the Rocky/Rocky Jr. relationship throughout the series is very logical. It's very believable. Even, as we'll get to in part 5, even if you take into account the corniness of the Tommy Gunn and George Washington Duke characters, if you get beyond that, a lot of the interaction between Rocky and Rocky Jr. is very realistic, and I think a lot of people overlooked that because of the more corny elements of the film. But anyway, though, and of course in part 4 they didn't just they also left him with the robot, since the robot seemed to be pretty skilled in doing household tasks.
So it was just the first and something that I'd noticed on that. So
I never thought about it, but yeah, that's very, very observative, and it's why I like having a second person here for these things, because that's something I'd never thought about. But you're absolutely right, and so anyway, and of course it's good that he took Paulie with him, to keep him from being with the kid by himself, because that probably would not have ended well. And
anyway, since in effect, he hired Paulie.
Yeah, and of course they're
part of it. He's part of the team. He had to go do something.
Although it would have made for a great scene if like Rocky and Adrian got back and just see that the Paulie's given the kid a few beers, and the kind of confrontation that would have taken place. But then Duke. I guess it's implied that he owns the gym out there, and is that the impression you got?
No, I didn't even think about
it.
Okay. I just knew that since he'd trained Apollo.
Yeah.
And I felt like Apollo brought him in on it, and I guess he said it was nice to be on the same side.
Yeah. So I just got the impression that he owned the gym, maybe not, but nevertheless he helped train Rocky, and then I also like, of course, Apollo had interacted with Paulie at the press conference in part 2, where Paulie made some wisecrack, and then Apollo said, "Who's that, Al Capone?" And then this time, Apollo has said enough of Paulie's crude remarks, and makes some sort of comment about it, and then Rocky's like, "Well, it takes like 6 years to get to know this guy." And then Apollo said, "I don't have 6 years." So then,
and that's another minor prophetic thing.
Yeah, it is. I never thought about that, but yeah, you're right.
That's another one of those little prophetic things.
Yeah. So then they they train, and Rocky's heart isn't in it, and he wants to do it tomorrow, and then Apollo shouts, "There is no tomorrow. There is no tomorrow," and then finally it hits rock bottom when they run on the beach, and Rocky has that collage going through his mind of all those bad things that have happened, and like Mickey's death and the beating from Clubber, and then he just stops. And then when Apollo gets to the finish line, he sees Rocky there, and he just says, "It's over."
It's over.
But then he just shouts one last time, "What's the matter with you?" Which is another repeated phrase of his during the movie, and so then Adrian gives him, the big pep talk, which is, something that was not quite done in the same kind of situation, but is similar to what happened, near the climax of 5, where basically she brings him back down to earth.
Yeah. Although what's interesting, when she started. When she was talking to him, I thought it sounded unnatural when she raised her voice, to be honest. I thought it kind of sounded, like somebody trying to raise their voice rather than it happening out of natural passion. I'm going to say that. That's just my kind of opinion.
It could be, although Talia Shire, if you ever heard her interview, she's just so soft-spoken, it probably wasn't natural for her.
Right, but I'm just saying it came across. But one of the things that struck me is what I talked about before is it's almost, he said he was afraid of what he was going to lose, and I think he was more, didn't, maybe he couldn't express it, but I think he was more afraid of what he thought he had lost already. And it's what I talked about, because, like the fights that weren't with the opponents who weren't what they should have been. It's that thing that he completely had started doubting himself back here, and it caught up to him. It's like when they were running, all that caught up to him.
Yeah.
And you said he had the montage going through his head. It caught up to him and stopped him dead in his tracks. So he was almost more afraid of what he thought he'd already lost.
Yeah, I mean, like, because Adrian was talking about, we have cars, we have houses, we have money, everything but the truth. And, I think it's that Rocky, I think at that point, he was questioning the validity, right. We have cars, money, and houses, but is it all based on a lie,
Right.
And so he's questioning his own worth. I mean, and of course, in part 5, he'd be, he's questioning his worth again, but for different reasons, because at that time, he had, really fallen hard.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in part 3, it was just in his head.
Right.
But, I'll go ahead. If you were gonna...
No, I was just saying that's just one thing that I just had always thought about. That is just, that goes back to his own, not even self-worth, but just whatever confidence he needed as a fighter.
Yeah.
Okay, those wins weren't really real or good wins, and maybe I'm not as good. So it's stuff he thought he'd already lost or never had and had been lied to about having. So it wasn't,
Oh, right. And, and one thing I like about Adrian's speech, both there in 3 and then both there in part 3 and then the one in part 5, is that, she was tough with him, but she was in a loving way,
Mm-hmm.
she wasn't trying to break him down. She was just trying to get him to see reality.
Right.
And, she did it out of love. And, so, and yeah, it's one of my favorite moments of the film. And just like in, same thing with part 5. I think that's one of my favorite moments from that film. And, because I think all of us at some time, we need someone like that in our lives who will tell us what we need to hear, but do it in a way where we understand their love for us, And it doesn't have to be a spouse like it is there. It could just be a friend, or it could be some relative, or it could be anybody, who cares and, who will tell you, the truth,
That's it.
And because I think one thing that happens when you get to be, on top of the world is you get surrounded by yes men. And I think that happened. That's the downfall of a lot of powerful people.
And it's not even just yes men, but again, like what was happening is you have people who go out of their way to make it easy for you to do whatever it is. I think that you also, a lot of people become complacent.
Yes, okay,
because they're so comfortable in the position they're in, they don't realize that they really, really have to fight just as hard to stay there.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the main themes of the movie, complacency. That Rocky had become complacent, with his place, as a not only heavyweight champion of the world, but as a major celebrity. And so, yeah, it was a very, and again, I think the Rocky-Adrian relationship was important to the series because he needed some kind of balancing act. And of course there were times when Adrian, she had hang-ups of her own, which is, I think, why, I view marriage the way I do, and I think it's a shame that so few people view marriage like this. I mean, I think so many times people, they seek in a spouse someone who's perfect, or I just think marriage should be two imperfect people who make each other better, who love each other unconditionally and, cherish each other's strengths and help with each other's weaknesses. And I think, we see Rocky and Adrian, we see the flaws of both of them throughout the series, but they do make each other better.
Right.
So and then, in part 6, in Rocky's friendship with Marie, you see that she's someone, who's a very different person and yet also could make him better. If she sticks around his life long enough, and we don't know what happened to him after that movie, but it certainly was beneficial, to him, and he was to her as well, as she was a struggling bartender. with raising a son by herself. And so anyway, so from here on out, we're going to be discussing the climax. So I'd guess probably most people watching this, know how the movie ends, but there's always a few people who don't. So if you don't want us to ruin it for you, then switch it off right now and just tune back in after you watched the movie. But so anyway, that conversation ends up being the transition into the training montage. And of course, one thing that's unusual about this training montage, unlike the first two, it's not in Philadelphia.
Yes, you can't have that iconic running up the steps.
In fact, it's the only training montage. In fact, actually, it's the only Rocky movie that doesn't feature some sort of sequence of somebody running up something. Of course, because in one of the montages in Rocky V with Rocky, showing the rise of Tommy Gunn's career, it does show Rocky and Tommy running up the steps together, and then of course he does in 1, 2, and 6, and then in 4 he runs up the mountain.
Right.
So this time it ends with them, running on the beach.
But instead of what he's trying to do, instead of overtaking the steps, he's trying to overtake Apollo.
Yes.
So
yes.
He does still have like this.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but that's a good way to look at it.
That was how they were trying to do it. He had to beat Apollo on that. And please, people, I know if you've seen on the IMDb, please, if you really are agreeing that this is some kind of homoerotic training sequences, please, the problem is with you, not with the movie.
Yes, I agree. I never had any problem with it. I always enjoyed it, but I always liked the interaction between Rocky and Apollo there, and another thing that I wish they'd done a little differently though, is the scene, because earlier before they start the training montage, Rocky's trying to swim and he's not doing real well, but then in the training montage he's getting really good at it, and then he gets to the end of a lap and he grabs Paulie by the t-shirt and pulls him down into the water, to Adrian's delight. She screams in pleasure over it. And I just wish they would have hung on just to show Paulie's reaction to that. But it's it's a great training montage, like all of them are, and then I don't remember as many iconic moments. I just remember the one of them, hugging each other, at the end on the beach. That's the thing and then pulling Paulie down into the water. And I don't really remember, not a lot of it stands out in my mind compared to the others, but anything about it that you...
just those things that I mentioned too. I mean, because that's what rings in my mind, is having read other people's commentary. And
so anyway, then we go back to the fight, and then Mr. T has a couple more great lines.
His most iconic.
Yeah, his most iconic, but he has a couple of better ones than that, though. Like, one of them, it's like, what's your prediction for the fight? My prediction? Yes, your prediction. Pain. Yeah, I love that line.
Yeah.
And then when they get out to the ring, it's like, hey, fool, you ready for another beating? You should have never came back.
Right, and now here, again, it's one of these situations where Clubber is 200% sure that he's going to win.
Oh, yeah.
He's 200% sure that the same Rocky who got into the ring with him before is the one who's getting in now.
Oh, yeah, it's like, what's your strategy for the fight? Don't need none.
Right, so at that point, you have some of that overconfidence working against him.
Oh, yeah, and then, then, of course, throughout the series, we see references to the previous films, and you see Apollo give Rocky the red, white, and blue trunks. Yeah, and so Rocky wears those, and that symbolizes the passing of the torch.
Right.
And then basically they have the match, and
well, and it's interesting too, because he lets Clubber pound on him some.
Yeah.
Because he's got that whole, I don't want to say his whole different strategy, because what was that? He's getting killed, and no, he's getting mad.
Yeah.
That whole thing with Paul, and they notice that, and Because Rocky goes to him, he's taking the punches, and you're not so tough, and is that
ain't so bad.
Ain't so bad, right?
Yeah.
And he's got that, so that when he starts punching, I mean, I hate to say, when he starts punching, makes Clubber look like the Rock'em Sock'em robots, just with his head going back.
Oh yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah, and of course the strategy ends up being that he wears Clubber down by making him miss a lot, and
possibly going more rounds than he'd had to before in fights.
Yeah, although he ended up only going 3. In fact, this is the only Rocky that climaxes with an official boxing match that doesn't go to the 15th round. Yeah, it's and then I forgot to mention before the fight. I also remember Clubber challenges Apollo, says something like after this year next or something like that, and then of course Rocky and Apollo, they have their dispute. It's like Rocky always has to have a dispute with his manager at some point in the fight,
right?
And this time Apollo gets on him, and Rocky insists that it's strategy,
right? And that's what I was saying. It was getting mad.
Yeah, and so another thing, even though he's never named, the guy who
your face is missing again.
Yeah. But I also really like the guy who plays Clubber's trainer. He's listed, and his name is never mentioned. He's just listed as Clubber's trainer in the credits. Played by an actor named Wally Taylor. He died a couple of years ago, but he was one of those. I'd never heard of him or seen him anywhere else, but he had a pretty long IMDb profile, so I guess he just did a lot of bit parts over his career. But yeah, I thought he was good as a real no nonsense guy who was trying to trying to give Clubber some good advice, but of course Clubber
didn't want to listen to
right. But yeah, certainly as a guy, when you mentioned the most memorable characters in the Rocky series, he's not going to be one of the top several, but I thought he added a couple of nice moments to that film. And in fact, I'm not sure if he was with Clubber in the first fight with Rocky or not. But yeah, he had several speaking lines in the second fight. So anyway, Rocky, after he wears Clubber down, then he goes in for the kill, and then I get a kick out of the part where then Apollo gets excited and he leans over and kisses Paulie on the cheek.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Because they were, what's interesting about that is because, like Paulie was his nemesis through the whole thing, so.
Yeah, and so that was one of the things that I liked the most about it.
Welcome to our show, Lec.
Because it shows that, like Paulie, he always, in the end, everything always works out with him. People always forgive him. And, he always ends up on good terms with everybody by the end of the movie. And however much he annoys them first, I still get a kick out of your perception of how he might have been a collector for Gazzo, that he might have just annoyed people to the point that they just gave him the money to get rid of him.
Yeah.
But anyway, so then Rocky knocks Clubber down, and then I always mention how the editing during the counts is often really good, and I like the switches it gets where you see the referee counting, and then you see Apollo say 7, and then finally when it gets to 9, you see Adrian is the one who says 9. Who's the one who's against.
Counting. Yeah, they're counting with him.
Yeah, and of course I forgot to mention Adrian's. I thought that she had said it in part 4, but then I was thinking she said stop the fight in both part 3 and part 4, but I guess it was only part 3 because I didn't catch it when I saw part 4 the other day. She said when he was getting killed at the beginning of the second Clubber fight, she said stop the fight. And that's just something that I always associate that with, since I always associate things like that with Adrian, since she's against him fighting for much of the series.
4, Apollo's wife said stop the fight, I believe.
Okay, yeah, that sounds right. And then of course Duke did as well. Specifically, Duke said to throw the towel. But so anyway, they get to the 10 count, and Rocky gets the belt back, and
Clubber's sitting there going,
Yeah, we see. Yeah, that's true. You never really see any reaction other than that he's being treated, on the canvas, but
Right.
and never to be heard from again. And like I said, I always, I thought it would have been a great touch if in part 6 he showed up homeless at Adrian's restaurant, as a much softer, gentler Clubber, but
I would
yeah,
say losing after all that puffing that he did in this
yeah,
probably it was a huge blow to him. That's the
yeah,
thing about having an ego that's that big.
yeah,
You know, you're that puffed up,
yeah.
and you
So
get that pin. You
yeah.
know.
So maybe it brought him down to earth. That's the thing we don't know. Just like we don't know what happened to Drago,
Mhm.
and we don't know what happened to Tommy Gunn either.
Mhm.
Although Dolph Lundgren and Mr. T, of course, are still living. Tommy Morrison sadly died a couple of years ago.
Mhm.
Which and really, you hate to look at it this way, but just Sage Stallone and Tommy Morrison dying just about a year apart. In a way, it just underscores the way that movie's viewed in people's minds
Right,
as a
and we
failure.
will discuss that, I guess, when we get to that.
Yeah. So anyway, Rocky's on top again, so all's right with the world.
Except now there's this favor.
Yeah. So we find out that Rocky and Apollo, Apollo wants a third fight with Rocky. This time, in private.
Mhm.
And the thing is, we know Rocky sustained a bruise in the fight from the beginning of part 4, but we don't explicitly know who won. But
Right.
we know that the fight is discussed in the upcoming Creed movie. Because in the trailer, it shows Apollo's son in the restaurant saying, "I heard you and Apollo had a third fight behind closed doors." And then Rocky's confused and says, "How do you know all this?" And then he says, "I'm his son."
Okay.
So maybe, just maybe we'll finally find out what happened in that
Yeah.
fight,
Although you had to wonder, even though, I mean, it was serious, but the way they were acting when they got in the ring, it was almost like it wasn't.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, especially, Apollo doing the ding, ding.
mhm.
And, so, yeah, that's, I think I thought it was a pretty innocuous ending. I think they could have ended it at the end. In the ring with Rocky raising the belt. But,
And it could have, but since they talked about that favor so many times, people would have. What about that? Somebody would have remembered it. Somebody like us, paying attention to detail, would have been like, "What happened to that favor he wanted?" So they had to put it in there.
Oh yeah, yeah, and it's and like I said, the fact that it's going to be talked about again in a sequel 33 years later, that shows that people remember it.
Right, absolutely.
Just like how as opposed to like how nothing in Rocky 5 was overtly mentioned in Rocky Balboa. There were a couple of things. The reference to the home team was brought back, but not necessarily to make people remember it from Part 5. And so anyway, yeah, Rocky 3 though, it was. I think it's generally regarded. It was the last Rocky that I remember doing very well with the critics. They didn't like 4, and especially not 5 very much. Then Rocky Balboa got the critics back.
Right.
Rocky 3 was actually the first Rocky I ever saw. I was 11 at the time. I saw it at the Ohio Theater down in Madison, Indiana, my hometown, on summer vacation between grades 5 and 6. And I had never, like I said, I hadn't seen 1 and 2 at that point, and I went back and saw 1 and 2 before I saw Part 4 3 years later, but so I caught up with it then. But yeah, I thought it was great at the age of 11, even though I didn't get all the references to the first 2 films, and now I'm 44, and I like the film as much as I did back then, maybe more, because there are things that I can appreciate more, being older and having had more life experiences. And
Well, for me, I didn't see. Wow, because I'd seen the original, and for some reason, I went through this thing where I just didn't go for sequels.
right,
I assumed it wasn't going to be good at that age, and
yeah,
later on, we saw what you call 6.
Yeah.
It's Rocky Balboa,
Mhm.
and that made me go back and watch 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Mhm.
So that was so it was around when Rocky Balboa came out. I first saw 3,
yeah,
and it's like, oh, Okay,
Yeah.
I wish I had seen it, because there is an effect of seeing a movie in a theater
There is, yeah.
that you don't really get watching it on your little screen or however you do it. So I think, yeah, I probably could have gone back and seen these. So that's when I saw it. It's still one that if I see it's on, I'll stop and watch it.
Mm-hmm.
It does have a lot of character things to offer. I
Mm-hmm.
say, I like the movies, as I've said, because you get to like the characters.
Yeah, yeah.
You get to be concerned about the characters.
Yeah, I think that's just something what's one of the key ingredients. I think it helps that they were so well established in the first film, um, and and the new characters that were introduced throughout, they were most of them were interesting. I mean, with a couple of exceptions, but Tommy Gunn. I hate to pick on the late Tommy Morrison, but that was not the best choice that Stallone ever made in the series. Um, Although, the one thing I will say about Tommy Morrison, the one good aspect, as we'll get to in part 5, is that he was the first Rocky opponent who was a real life boxer, and that came through. I mean, his boxing sequences were very, very believable. And of course, he went on to become heavyweight champion of the world in the early '90s, briefly. Um, and then of course Antonio Tarver in part 6, that he's a high level boxer as well, and a much better actor than Tommy Morrison too, by the way, which isn't saying much, but did you think that Tarver wasn't?
I'll save anything for when we do that.
Oh, okay.
How about that?
Oh, that's fine. Yeah. I didn't think he was in like Oscar material, but I thought he was good. But,
I judge. Well, I'll just say this blanket wise.
Yeah.
I judge
Yeah.
whether somebody's good or bad on whether or not the character was believable for me.
Oh, okay.
And actually, that means that sometimes,
Yeah.
an actor, I'll see in something if the character doesn't come across as believable.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that another character won't when they.
Yeah.
Same actor, so it's hard. I don't like to just say that the actor.
Yeah, well, yeah, maybe maybe Tommy Morrison, had he been given a good role, maybe he would have done well. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's like another example. Like I see, for example, in like the Karate Kid Part 3, is one of the worst written major studio movies I've ever seen. Which is surprising because the first two, especially the first one, are very well written, and they just lost it on the third one. I see people talk on the message boards on IMDb all the time about how terrible Ralph Macchio is in Part 3, and I was thinking, there's nothing wrong with Ralph Macchio. It's the problem is he has a terrible script to work with.
So looking at so again, if we're looking back at 3, what we just talked about, I have to ask myself about even Clubber. Was he believable? Yes.
Yeah, for the kind of character he played,
right.
yeah.
I mean, did I believe that character? Yes. And, of course, the other characters that, we'd already seen in the movies. So same comment, it's believable. I believe what I'm watching.
Yeah.
That's important.
And, Roger Ebert, who I often disagreed with, but, he made a comment I think, was very profound. He said he attempts to judge movies based on how well they do what they attempt to do. And now I didn't always agree with the way he assessed movies, and sometimes I did, sometimes I didn't. Same with his partners, but with Rocky 3, it does a great job at what it attempts to do. Mr. T could not have played the character better, considering the way the character was written.
Right.
And it's like with the over the top elements and the sensationalism, it would go up to another level in Rocky 4. But again, while a lot of critics disliked that one, I thought it succeeded simply because it achieved what it tried to achieve. Right. Even though I think it's compared to the others, it has a very thin plot. The writing is the least has the least depth in the series.
We'll get into that, I guess, next week, won't we?
Yes, we will. Yeah. So, but yeah. So, in conclusion, I think that I'll give you my ranking in the last episode when we do Rocky Balboa 3 episodes from now. But I think part 3. I think for the most part was excellent. I think it had a great message about about complacency and about facing your demons and
Agreed.
not running away from from your problems, but facing them and just trying to keep your drive.
And for the people around you, same thing. You can become complacent right along with them.
Yeah.
And as he had people around him who let that happen, and then they had to make that shift too.
Oh yeah, they did. Yeah.
They had to make that shift to not let him be complacent anymore and to get his drive back.
Oh yeah, and that's like I said, that's one of the biggest downfalls of powerful people is being surrounded by yes men.
Mm.
And one other lineup I was going to mention, another favorite line of mine from Mr. T is when Rocky says, you got a very big mouth. That's at the retirement scene, and then he goes, well, why don't you come out here and close it?
Mm.
That's another good one. So I don't understand why I Pity the Fool became so iconic, and I just thought he had several better lines than that.
I don't know. I do know that it became so iconic that people thought he said it in the A-Team rather than Rocky 3. So.
Yeah, and of course that was the A-Team, and I think it's he went into that within a few months after Rocky 3, and I think and I don't think he's ever done another bad guy role. I could be wrong, but I mean I've seen him as good guys, and I mean even recently, I mean my son was a fan of the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movie, and it was a pair of movies. I think it's some computer animation thing, but yeah, he voiced one of the main characters in there. And so he's at least still around getting decent gigs.
There you go.
And Mr. T, he had leukemia back in the '90s, and he looked pretty grim, but he bounced back, and I guess he's healthy again.
Yeah.
So I was glad to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So any last words on Rocky 3?
I think we're good.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to Rocky 4.
Yeah. Okay. So as always, thank you for joining us as we conclude here our Super Deep analysis of Rocky 3. Feel free to share this video. Feel free to like Super Deep Movie Analysis on Facebook. And we will be back sometime probably next week for I Must Break You. Till then, for Super Deep Movie Analysis, this is Lec Zorn and Michelle Gussow. Good night.